Good afternoon and welcome to the University of Central Lancashire to our very special launch today of continuing drama production for television. My name is Alan Keegan. I'm going to be hosting this Q&A and this very special event this afternoon. Before we start, we are broadcasting this live through Facebook, so we're delighted to welcome anybody who's viewing online. But in particular, we'd like to welcome all our very special guests today. Give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you. So, our panel, we're delighted to welcome from the world of Coronation Street, the wonderful actress, Jennie McAlpine. And we're also delighted to welcome AJ Reid, who's Publicity and Engagement, ITV in the North. Head of Production, Continuing Drama, ITV Studios, Matt Cleary. Head of Continuing Drama Series at BBC Studios, Ollie Kent. And Executive Producer, Holby City and Casualty from the BBC, Simon Harper. So we're going to begin with AJ, and AJ, if you don't mind, what is the difference between continuing drama and single drama production?
Apart from that you're in it, clearly, I've just seen that, there's quite a big difference. Obviously, they're both dramas. However, continuing drama is a juggernaut. It doesn't stop. A single drama goes on for so many months. You're crewed up, ready to go, filmed, and then a few months later, you probably don't see the guys again until your next series, or maybe never again. Continuing drama produces the equivalent of 2.5 feature films a week. Roughly, when you're doing 6 eps a week, which we do with Coronation Street and Emmerdale. It's 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year, not 50, we have 2 weeks off at Christmas. And it's something that if you can imagine doing 2.5 feature films a week and you just do not stop. Usually a bigger cast, unless we've got a cast of 70-ish in Corrie. How many in Emmerdale? That's 70, and 3 dogs. Don't forget the dogs. And just the scheduling and sheer sort of enormity of the task at hand on a drama that just doesn't stop makes it very different. The nature of the beast is very different.
Now, Ollie, we'll ask you, because obviously it's interesting to see that overview that AJ's giving there, particularly with the numbers and the difference in the hours and whether or not it looks like it's the same amount of time for a feature film. But what are the key ingredients for a successful continuing drama in terms of the world and characters?
Well, actually, in very simple terms, those are the 2 most important things. The world of the show, of any drama, the precinct, the where it's set, is always a character. Whether it's Albert Square, or whether it's the wards of Holby City Hospital, or whether it's Leatherbridge in Doctors. The world, the precinct, dictates the tone, because all continuing dramas ultimately are about home. And therefore where your characters live is really fundamentally important, and you have to be consistent with that. Well, something that we often say at EastEnders is that the square is the star. No one is bigger than the show. The square itself, the tone, the values of the place, they're fundamentally important. And in character terms, you can't necessarily have complete realism, because it would probably be a little bit boring if everything was completely realistic. But it has to be truthful. So you have to have characters that can tell stories that feel truthful, that feel a bit like life, but with the boring bits taken out. And you have to, there are certain characters that you need in a soap. You need certain archetypes, matriarchs, alpha males, you name it, tart with a heart. There are certain archetypes that every show will have and will need, and you have to be consistent with those. I think the world, the precinct, is almost the most important thing.
Okay. Now, Jennie, I'm sure there's many students here very interested in your overview, particularly with this question, because is a drama school training important if you want to become a screen actor?
Well, I didn't go to drama school, so maybe you can answer that yourselves, whether I should have done, I don't know, but I didn't. It's a bit late now. Been there 17 years. Well, I think if you think about Coronation Street, which has been going since 1960, the whole of the original cast, bar none of them went to drama school. There's no such thing as drama school then. They were in weekly rep, and they learnt their trade in the theatre. Rep meaning they'd do, basically it was like soap opera in the theatre. So they would do a show every couple of weeks, a different show. The same cast, maybe 20 casts, company of actors, and they'd put one show on, then 2 weeks later they'd rehearse another one and put another one on. So yeah, but there's lots of probably, I don't know, no, maybe I'd say over half, less than half of the cast of Corrie have been to drama school. Yeah, definitely, I'd say that. I think it depends. So it obviously isn't an essential, because there's lots of actors who are in Coronation Street now who've never been to drama school. There's also lots of actors I know who've been to drama school and who've never had an acting job. So it's a really difficult question. I think education in general is important, whatever that is. Because the discipline of education, whether that's a traditional education or the education that those actors in the 1960s had at the theatres, some kind of discipline that you do get from school, from some kind of education is probably important. Because even though, like AJ said, they do give us Christmas off, they're quite kind. Apart from, yeah, thank you, Matt. Apart from that, they're pretty strict, and you have got to be quite well behaved and quite disciplined. So I'd say having a discipline from something is important, but drama school,
It's horses for
no.
courses.
It's totally horses for courses.
Like
I know people who. I do. I know people, I've met people who've been to drama school and who are extremely snobby about continuing dramas or soap operas. But I also know people who haven't been to drama school who are completely blasé and think that, oh, can I get a job in a soap? Will it be all right? Will it be easy? So both is not the right way to be. Whatever you fancy.
2.5 feature films a week isn't easy though, is it,
No.
Jen?
That'd be my answer, in a long-winded way. Is that all right, Alan?
Sticking to horses for
Jenny,
courses.
thank you for that very clear answer there. That's really put their mind at ease. No, we understand it's difficult, isn't it? And we can appreciate that. Obviously, we have acting courses, we have people who sort of come from the sort of production side who end up in the acting.
You
So,
do.
you know, there's a crossover.
And you
isn't
end
there?
up with actors who become directors, who become producers, the other way. Most people actually in the job that, well, you were just saying this, Matt, most people in the jobs that they have in television aren't the job that they started out doing. You know, or even the path that they started out doing.
How many people in the room know what you want to be? Who knows exactly what they want to do? See, that's not many.
I don't.
So that's a good thing, by the way. It's not good or bad, but it's interesting.
Okay, well, we're going to come to Matt in a moment, so we'll get another answer and another perspective from his view. But Simon, and it's quite interesting that Jenny's mentioned there regarding that crossover, because some actors become producers, directors, and vice versa. So, with yourself, what training did you receive in order to gain the production knowledge and experience that you have? What was that trailblazing sort of passage?
I had no training whatsoever. I completely learnt on the job. I mean, I think this venture is brilliant. It's great that this is happening. But in my day, when I was at school, university, hundreds of years ago, there was nothing like this. I mean, I'd say regardless of training, what's important, and it might sound obvious, is that you just have to love telly. Yeah. Which I always did when I was a kid. I was totally in love with BBC drama, and I remember watching the first ever episode of EastEnders when I was 13 years old, and just falling in love with soap, and never dreaming that I'd be lucky enough to work in soaps one day. So, and that's one thing I always did. And when I was first looking to break into television, watch TV, have opinions about the TV you love. I used to write down writers I noticed whose dramas I liked, or directors whose stuff I liked, what I liked, why I liked it, stuff that didn't work so much for me, to have thoughts and opinions that I could always back up, so that when it came to having coffees with people when I was trying to network to get into the industry, or having actual interviews, that I would have stuff to talk about. It sounds obvious, but Ollie and I were just saying, quite often if we have a coffee with somebody who wants to come and see us, and we say, what TV are you watching? Oh, I've not got much time at the moment to watch telly. Yeah. It happens more often than you'd think. Yeah. So never go into a coffee meeting not having watched lots of TV and having lots of opinions about it. I mean, I did a degree in English literature. I'm not saying you have to do that if you want to go my route, which is to become a script editor and work with writers and eventually become a producer. But I suppose doing English literature was part and parcel of just loving stories and storytelling. And that's what we're all doing, whether we're a director or a writer or a producer or an actor. We're all looking to put the best possible stories and characters on screen. So it's that love of storytelling. Before I joined the television industry, one thing I did do, which I suppose you could regard as a kind of training, was I used to do script reading for film and TV companies when I first moved to London when I was in my early 20s. And that's something independent film and TV companies still do. They get lots of scripts sent to them, and what they do is they farm out these scripts to freelance people, as I was at the time, just to do coverage for them. So you would do a page, they would say, you know, if I had no money and a bank holiday weekend was coming up, I would phone Film 4, who I used to read for, and say, oh, have you got anything for me to cover over the weekend? So they would send me a wodge of scripts and even novels as well for possible adaptation, which I used to really enjoy. And over the weekend, I would sort of read intensively and just give them coverage. So, and you would write a synopsis and then you would do your thoughts on this project. And on that basis, they would reject that project or they might pursue it further. And I think that, though I didn't know it, that was where I began to be a script editor. That was giving me the tools and the language and the thought process to talk about story and why it didn't work, characters, why they worked or didn't work. And then when I came into television, and especially because I've worked on Holby for quite a few years. I've only started doing Casualty over the last year, but I did Holby for some years before that, and I just learnt on the job, really. I joined Holby as a production script editor, and then became the script producer on the show, working with new writers and running the writing slate. Then I became the series producer, and now I'm the exec producer of both shows. And just, you know, you learn about editing by working with writers. You learn by working closely and being around other people. I've worked with Ollie closely for years now, and I've learned a lot off him, and vice versa, I hope. And, you know, when you're on set, just when I was a script editor, going on set as much as I could, just to know what people did. You know, because that's a big thing, demystification of the process. And I think this is why this is a really good thing, you know, just knowing what everybody does on a set and how all those roles work.
And I think it's important to know that people think, well, I can't do it, I'll never make it. Some people sort of get a bit nervous about that, but we have one guy that is from UCLan, he's your alumni. He was a runner when I started at Corrie eight years ago. He's now a director, and he's just gone freelance and is directing both Emmerdale and Coronation Street, and be doing other things. Now that in 8 years, I've never sort of seen that rise that quickly, but he's your alumni and he's done it. So don't ever think that if you really want it, you can do it. That's really important.
I think it's an interesting message that all the panel have given, and it's quite apt that I'm moving to you now, Matt, because particularly when we talk about experience and that road into the industry, because that's the big question. I'm sure people who are watching online or all of our guests here today, it's that step over the line into the door. And, you know, we always ask people like yourself about trainees gaining experience on the productions across the board. I mean, how does that work?
Okay, well, I mean, across Emmerdale and Corrie, it depends on what year you look at, but we've got a constant stream of people coming into our industry who we set off and train on a career path, and whether it be, you know, camera assistants or trainee sound assistants or assistant directors, we're constantly looking for people to join our teams, because across our shows we employ about 600 to 700 people in total. And a lot of those are production grade, so, you know, looking across the people who work on a studio floor, you know, on both shows we're looking, you know, at hundreds of people. And so there are people at all stages of their career, and people who are moving through their careers and moving out of their careers into retirement or into other types of production. So we're always looking to re-energise that pool of people. So there's lots of opportunities to train. There's lots of different routes in, and it completely depends on your interests and what your sort of craft skills are as to the direction that you might go in. To Jenny's point earlier, I think what's brilliant about our shows is that within Corrie and Emmerdale, and the same for the BBC shows, we've got the whole range of production grades sitting within production with lots of staff grades. So people will join us and they'll stay with us for many, many years. And that means that we can really invest in training, because those people are there working as part of our shows, you know, passing on their skills to a new generation of people. So you can set off, you know, at somewhere like Emmerdale, and the director that AJ mentioned is a really good example, you know, as a sort of a floor assistant or a runner. And ultimately, you can end up doing something completely different. Because if you've got the talent and you've got the skill and the ability, then, you know, you will find a way through and a way of doing that. And we're really good at supporting it, because we need so many people and we need to be constantly refreshing people, that it's in our best interest to do that.
Now we are going to open up the Q&A to the floor, so we think this is an appropriate point. Would anybody like to ask the panel? We've got someone on the second row, thank you. Just before you ask the question, is anybody on this side, and we can be ready to come to you, who'd like to ask a question? Just show me your hand and then we'll come to you. Okay, gentleman on the end. Thank you. Tell the panel your name and what's your question?
Hi, my name's Mia, and my question is, for a 17-year-old wanting to like get into the industry, what experience would you recommend? And like, is there anywhere where like they actually like accept like under 18s? Because places like the BBC, I've wrote to a couple places and they only say that they allow like 18s or over to do work experience with their industry. So if you've got any recommendations.
You know, is the work experience, and I know you all sort of will have the same question about work experience and what you do, and the 18, I think we're now over 18s, mostly for our work experience as well, because we have to be. We tend to say there are routes, there are still things like hospital radio, or go and volunteer at your local radio station, make tea, bug them on a Saturday, sit in the room, refuse to leave and just listen and learn, smile lots, do everything that's asked of you. But also we sort of we tell people away from what you do, even if you're at uni or college, the stuff that you're doing outside of your course, and I know it's really busy and if you're working to keep yourself through uni as well, but the extracurricular stuff, so you're vlogging or blogging or short film making or writing, the stuff that you can show us that you've been doing, or just drop into conversation that you happen to have a blog. That's really important, because if there's 10 of you and you're all brilliant on the same course, what's going to make you stand out? Personality and confidence, definitely, which is hugely important. You can't really be shy in our industry. But the stuff that you're doing outside of that, the fact that you're writing a blog, vlog, book, whatever you're doing, puts you in good stead and becomes experience. And the only other thing I'll say is people have said to me before, students, you know, well, I work in a restaurant or work in a shop, I don't have time, and they sort of dismiss that they work in a restaurant. People skills from working in a restaurant or working out there and, you know, getting out and about between people, don't dismiss that. That actually is a confidence building thing, and it's putting you amongst, it's even for writers, storyliners, you're living a life and you're picking up things when you're out and about in the real world, so don't dismiss that. And I know you can probably do that a little bit easier than getting work experience within broadcasting at your age.
I think Simon made a really valid point earlier that it's about passion. You know, when I can't begin to tell you how many people come for an interview on one of our shows and we'll ask them about the programme and they won't have watched it or they'll have no interest in it. And it beggars belief, doesn't it, that actually you would go for a job and not really know something about where you're applying to. So, you know, if you love TV and if you live and breathe it, that will come through in your interview, and that speaks volumes. And you're absolutely right, you know, I mean, we interview people who come to us and say, well, you know, really I'd like to be a director, but I'm happy to start off as a camera operator or a camera assistant, and that's brilliant. And we'll say, okay, well, you know, what experience have you got? And they'll say, well, I haven't got any. But then you'll interview someone who, you know, who makes short films on their phone, you know, and they're little things like that they're thinking all the time about the craft that they want to do and how they could achieve it. You know, people who want to work in sound, maybe they've got a job in their local amateur theatre, you know, doing some sound, or maybe they're doing lighting design for somebody, you know. So there are lots of ways of gaining skills that aren't necessarily in TV, but they transfer into the industry. And that's what you should be thinking. If I can't get my experience in a company like ITV or the BBC, how can I build some experience around the skill set so that I can demonstrate that passion and enthusiasm?
Yeah, and you've got access to Google, which was what Matt's saying. You know, you've got access to Google. We didn't have Google. I'm very old. You're not so old, Jenny.
I didn't have Google though.
None of us had Google.
And LinkedIn, and you can research. You know what Matt says? We had somebody come talk about they were an expert in sound, a student. It's all he wanted to do. He lived for working in sound. That's all he ever wanted to do. And we asked him the question, which film changed sound in filmmaking forever? Which, I don't know if anybody does know. Is Apocalypse Now. He'd never even heard of the film, never mind had any understanding that. And I think if you gauge the kind of, he was so confident about what he wanted, and as soon as it was other questions as well, you kind of think, well, you don't have to actually watch it, you've got Google. You know, I'm a press officer as well and an ex-journalist. We don't fake anything, but we can make things up when we've researched it if we need to be. I don't need to have watched Apocalypse Now to know it changed sound forever. It's important that you use all the tools you've got.
And you've got that, you have got those, and you would do that. Even I sound old, but you have got that. I mean, but yearly, every year, you have got 100% more access to things that you can do in your own bedrooms, in your own living rooms, in your own sheds, with your own mobile phone. Everybody has got a mobile phone. That's incredible tools that you've got, that you can create your own work experience and create your own CV before you've even had a job, and you can go to your first job interview and say, look at all the things I've done already myself.
Especially short films are brilliant experience, and all the short film festivals, if you're into filmmaking, it's a brilliant way of getting sort of getting out and about and understanding that.
And going to the film festivals, I guess, and just going in as guests and just seeing, just watching what happens there.
And also, I think, in addition to all of that, I think you should read loads. You have to become a kind of voracious consumer of stories, whether that's reading, theatre, radio drama, everything. You kind of have to absorb as many stories as you possibly can. Actually, that, I think, is more important than work experience. Because it means that when you know, if, for example, you want to work in a story team, if you want to work in a story team and you don't know the story of King Lear, you're not going to get a job. So you kind of have to know the world of stories as well, and I would say that's more important than work experience. And I think sometimes there's an idea that work experience is the be-all and the end-all. It's great if you can get it, but it's quite rare, and most people don't do it.
I'd also say on Holby and Casualty, a very good starting position is the position of researcher. Both shows have researchers. So if you're for example, if you're a writer on Holby, you get given your own researcher who kind of does all the medical stuff for you, if you like. So the writers come at it and sort of brief the researcher, who more often than not are quite young and starting out in the industry, and they brief them what they want medically, the medical story for their episode, and the researcher goes off and does all of that, talking to our consultants. And the researchers don't have any medical background themselves. You know, typically they might be a recent graduate, but you know, the experience that they have to start out as a researcher is the experience that they've collated at school and at uni or college or whatever, you know, just collating information, doing an essay, doing a project, collating information, building, arguing a case. So yeah, I agree with you. So those general skills are you know, completely transferable.
Interesting. How many was talking about storytelling and the different ways? Because I started in, I didn't start in TV, I'll tell you in a minute. Has everybody heard of The Archers? Who hasn't heard of it? Go on, be honest. Who hasn't heard of it? Brilliant. I started in radio, and that's radio drama. I'm slightly obsessed with it, and in fact, The Archers boss has just come to us from you. But that's storytelling, radio, and there's some amazing podcasts and storytelling on radio as well as TV. I know we're talking about continuing drama on TV, but this is the sort of stuff that you should be absorbing. Some of the podcasts out there now and some of the stuff that's coming in from America, the dramas are absolutely phenomenal, including the live crime ones, which I'm a bit obsessed with. But there's lots of different ways of storytelling. The Archers has been going 60 years next. 60 years drama on radio. Yeah. It's great.
I think, you know, based on all of that, the key absolutely is know what you want to do and then work out what it is you need to do to support it. You know, because I think being focused is good, and therefore You know, there is no point if you want to work in story. You know, being a really proficient sound engineer probably isn't going to help you that much. You know, so just sort of keep your eye on the end goal, and then sort of try and build some skills around that.
Okay, thank you. I think we've got a question here from Holly. Is that right, Holly? Just on the end. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Holly. What would you think that the most significant change in production has been over the past 10 years or so?
Who's first?
I'm not doing technical.
HD.
Yeah.
Okay, HD.
You've got the panel thinking here. You can feel the vibe, can't you? Yeah.
Also moving to Apple.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
Do you know, the thing is that we were having this conversation earlier that the technological change that's happened in our industry over the past 10 years is unprecedented. I mean, if you go back to the start of when TV started or when we started to make film, I mean, the basic processes are sort of still the same, but what's come with living in a digital world and moving from analog is a whole heap of different ways of working, different ways of capturing what we do, moving away from using tape into digital formats, being able to digitally enhance things to make them look better, whereas in the past we would have had to do everything, in a more mechanical way. And I think that has, that's really enabled our shows, I think, to move forward. I think another thing that strikes me is that the thing that we never had sort of 10 years ago is the whole social media world, and that has really changed how we approach a lot of what we do. And we're really mindful of the fact that when we're telling stories and when we're thinking about how we engage with our audience, we know that now, talking to the people who watch our shows online or in a social media environment is really, really important, because the conversation about the show now extends much further than it used to do and is much more widespread. And everything we do is reported so much more easily. So I feel personally that in the old days of making sort of Emmerdale, the scrutiny used to come from the press first and foremost, and that's all you'd really hear, because if people didn't like it, they might tell you if they knew you, but you wouldn't really hear what people thought as an instant reaction to what was on screen. But now I can sit at home and I can watch Corrie, Emmerdale, EastEnders, whatever, and you get an instant reaction from your audience, and you sort of have to take it with a pinch of salt because it's only a single viewpoint,
It can be slightly.
But it is a way of sort of understanding what your audience is thinking and feeling, and I think that is a massive change, that whole social media interaction and that whole sort of digital revolution.
Yeah. I think also the explosion of new channels. There's more drama on television online than I think there's ever been. That's a huge change for us. Partly it means we have to compete far harder for the same audience, but I think that's made a very big difference.
Yeah, I think, I don't know about you, I certainly feel that across all our shows we've really pushed, how we tell our stories and the pace of the shows and the amount of story in our episodes, because we are competing, and you look across the whole sort of, proliferation of platforms and channels, and and it's really hard as a viewer to sort of know where to go, but we know that on our shows that they are very much still an appointment to view, that people like the regularity of sitting down and watching a continuing drama, because I guess we know that people like to binge on box sets. Well, on the shows that I look after, there are 6 episodes a week of both, so you can literally watch that, and you probably haven't got time to watch anything else. So, you can, and that goes on and on and on, over sort of 40, 50, 60 years. So, I think we've still got a place, but we have to work harder to compete and to pull audience in.
And it's quite interesting because people still say, oh well, it's going. I think I've been in TV for about 30 years, and my mum says you've not got a proper job. It's temporary.
Yeah, my mum says that.
I don't know what proper job is.
So have you got a proper job?
I've definitely not got a proper job.
But if you think about it, and somebody actually questioned us when we were doing a project with you guys here about, well, should you be telling young people to come into television or media, because is there any longevity? And I kind of looked at them and thought, well, Corrie's been on 60 years, Emmerdale's coming up to 50, I've been in it 30 years, my boss has been in it 40 years, between us we're hitting. away from that, you're coming into a world that's bigger than ever. You're looking at the Netflix dramas, and the amount of product to consume on media, digital or on terrestrial at the moment, is huge. So actually, although it's a very different world than the one I started in, you are coming into the world at a really exciting time. It's just one that is very different to the one that we started in. I mean, you know, Facebook are starting doing broadcasts, YouTube are looking at doing TV program commissions. It's huge. Now, for a viewer, it's a kind of like, I can't cope, I don't even have Sky. But for somebody who wants to work in this industry, if your parents ever say, oh, go and get a proper job, you know, one that'll last 40 years, well, on this table we're probably about
over 100. Thank you. Great question, that, Holly, by the way. We've got a young lady here on this end. Thank you. Questions are great, by the way. Keep them coming.
Hey, I'm Charlotte. I was just wondering if you all had the same amount of passion as you like did when you started the job as you do now.
Oh. Yeah, I think I have more, actually. I don't mind owning up to the fact that actually when I joined Holby City, I probably shouldn't say this publicly, but I joined it slightly reluctantly. I had a great career mentor, still do it, John York, who's now working with Ollie on EastEnders, and he was head of independent drama commissioning and the continuing dramas at the BBC at the time, and he gave me my first job, and I was working in development at the BBC, and John, being very passionate about continuing drama, sort of sent me to Holby basically as a script editor. Said, you know, you need to get your hands dirty, you need to cut your teeth on the coalface of these shows. And I fully admit I was probably a bit snobby about soaps and continuing dramas. I sort of perceived myself as that wasn't something that I necessarily wanted to do. So this is very shaming, but it's good to talk about it. And I just completely fell in love with it. Within 2 months, my whole perception of it had changed, you know, particularly working on Holby, which is not what sometimes people perceive it is. You know, it's an hour of pretty sophisticated, I mean, it is a soap, and I'm not ashamed of the word soap because I love soap, but on another level, it's a very sophisticated, character-driven medical drama. And within 2 months, when I saw what went into putting together one of these scripts, and this amazing cast and crew putting their life and soul into making it in really these really daunting schedules that all our shows make it on. I mean, you know, Holby and Casualty, it's an hour a week. How these guys do 2 hours of television a week is beyond me. Was it
2 hours a week?
Oh, Casualty? No, it's an hour.
It's an hour each. You do make 2 hours a week.
Oh, we do make 2 hours a week, okay, well.
But there's nothing, I think there's nothing more exciting than making shows for a living and telling stories that millions of people are going to watch.
Yeah, exactly.
It's completely addictive.
And also, we get to make stuff that's on all the time.
We do.
You know, I mean, development has its advantages. You know, if you want a job at an indie and you're developing and pitching shows, that's great. But you know, it can take years to develop and pitch a new show and get it off the ground. So we're in a very privileged position where we just to make stuff that's on every week, and that's really fantastic and addictive, actually. Yeah.
I mean, you've got to remember, you know, looking at Emmerdale and Corrie, I mean, this year we're making about 635 episodes. I mean, you know, today, for example, I know that we've got 8 units filming across 2 shows, working across 12 different studios, 2 locations. I mean, you know, you can't do that unless you're passionate about what you do, because it's just too big. But it is big and it is exciting. And you know, your point about it being continuing is great, because, you know, I think, you know, the continuing drama world is one of the most creative environments that I've worked in my time sort of working in TV, and I've worked in factuals and I've worked in entertainment and now work in continuing drama, because in order to keep a show on air for, you know, 45 years or nearly 60 years in terms of Corrie, you're constantly trying to create new ways of telling. I mean, sometimes the same stories, but with different characters in different situations, different viewpoints, different environments, and keeping it fresh. So you're constantly developing and pitching your own ideas to actually make your show bigger and better and keep that audience engaged. And it is a really, really rewarding environment to work in.
And you've got to remember that no matter if you watch Corrie or Emmerdale or Holby or EastEnders, Coronation Street's been on air for nearly 60 years, and in 60 years it's not been out of the top 10 most watched programmes every week. Now, when you see headlines, oh, Corrie's this and Corrie's that, or EastEnders, or these programmes are the most watched programmes on British television, and people tend to forget that. That's 58 years of being one of the most watched programmes on British television. It's actually a bit ridiculous when you think about it.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Well, don't say that.
It's brilliant. It's social history.
But yeah, do you know what though? Yeah, because that might also sound a bit scary if you were trying to come into an industry like that it's so big and scary, because actually it doesn't feel like that. And the reason it is so easy to do our scenes on our sets is because it doesn't feel like there's millions of people watching it. It just feels like we're there as a family. It genuinely does. That have been around, and some of the crew have been around for those said 60 years. I mean, seriously. Some of our crew are well over retirement age, and our cast, Bill Roach being one of them, Barbara Knox. But so it actually doesn't feel like this big,
No.
do you know what I mean? It doesn't actually feel like this big scary place. It actually feels like a lovely family.
I think when people forget when you're there, because we're there, obviously, I'm not there all the time now, but we're there. It's just we go to work and you do what you do.
A bit like your uni courses or school classes. You know, your school's this massive place, your uni's this massive place, but actually once you get there and you get in your little group, in your little lecture hall, you're just there doing your little bit, aren't you? And then you think, oh God, I'm at this big place when you come outside.
First morning is probably a bit scary.
Oh
It's
gosh,
alright.
yeah.
It's a bit like school.
Yeah.
I tell you what, it's quite nice, is because we all sit here, we're on competing channels, and we make shows that sometimes play out against each other, but there are so many people who work on our shows, who work across all of our shows, whether they're BBC or ITV, whether they're directors, assistant directors, camera operators, and there is almost like a sort of wider family thing amongst the continuing drama world, because we all, we share knowledge. We don't share what we're putting on screen, but we talk about how we make the shows. We have visits from EastEnders to come and look at, Corrie and our facilities, and we go back down there to sort of see what they're doing. So there is a lot of sharing of information. So, it's quite a nice environment to be in, because, you sort of feel outside of your own programme, there's this wider network that sort of spans across the whole industry.
Although it can get competitive because there's a boat race just happened at
who
Media
won
City.
it?
I don't know. Can somebody find out?
Oh, it's important,
BBC
yeah.
versus ITV boat
Yeah.
race for Sport Relief happened in the last half hour, and I'm hoping.
We
Sorry,
won.
but the trophy's coming to our side of the canal.
It's the salt version of Cambridge and Oxford.
Yeah.
We'll let you decide
quite
who's
as
Not
It's
so
not quite
BBC, BBC. Yeah, I think I might know who's won, and I think it might not be us. But anyway,
Right.
maybe
Never
we can
know.
find out.
Yeah, we'll find out for you. No problem, HA. Great question about the passion there. by the way.
Got the
Yeah.
six
No, he's
Excited.
changed his
Who's been
mind.
asked
He's changed. No, he's changed.
Are you sure? No,
Oh, the
they've
guy in
known
the front.
this one
Right,
here.
sorry, yes.
Oh, he's
okay.
excited.
Gentleman at the back.
We've got
doesn't-
time,
Oh,
haven't we?
okay.
2 minutes.
He's asked. His question's been asked.
Oh, it's been asked. Oh, he got...
I'm Alicia. I'm more interested into the acting side of things, and I was going to apply for drama school this year, but I've not had a chance to because I've not had a chance to do monologues. But I am more interested into like the soap opera side of things, more like movies. I was wondering if this would be like a good way to get into like the industry and stuff like that.
So essentially you're wondering if this is a good way of going through sort of continuing drama to get into a different world, like the movie world.
I don't really want
No,
to
the
be in
other way
like
round.
movies.
Oh, the other way
Want
round,
to be in
okay.
continuing drama.
Yeah, I like the
To act, yeah. But do you do any acting? Do you do any drama workshops? Do you do any?
I do performing arts, and I'm in like the. In my college I do the drama production and stuff, but I don't do much outside of it because I have to pay for like bills and stuff.
I always think the best thing, because I didn't go to drama school, and but the best thing is that I was in my local. I know you're a bit older than this now, but when I was about 6, I was in my local parish players pantomime, and local amateur dramatics, theatre groups, all those kind of things, as well as looking into that, because then you can start and see if it's definitely what you want. Local free things, not things that you have to pay for. Free workshops, free amateur dramatics, all those kind of things I think are brilliant alongside.
Amateur dramatics, definitely, because
Yeah.
you probably
Okay.
do have a local
Thank
group.
you for that. We've still got time to take some from the floor. Javid, where is it? We've got one at the front as well, Tanya, gentleman here. Thank you. Some really great questions, by the way. Thank you. You're testing the panel.
Do you ever feel yourself kind of slipping into the same kind of narrative structures for episodes at any times, or do you always try and keep it fresh?
It's a really good question. Yes to both. I think in what we do, navel gazing is really important. So after every episode goes out, we on our teams tend to look at it and go, did we get that right? Was that working? Did we hit the tone right? What did the audience think of it? Because there's no story that we haven't already told. We just have to do it in a different way, in a fresh way with different characters. The risk is if you try too hard to be different, you can bamboozle the audience because they watch our shows expecting to see the same show.
Because with regard to Holby and Casualty especially, format is not a dirty word, and the audience want a format. In Casualty, they want the stunt. If you know Casualty, part of it is that stunt at the beginning, and you think, oh God, this couple are arguing, and she's going too near the iron, and she's going to get electrocuted, or the baby's crawling towards the cliff, or the explosion, or in the same sense in Holby, there's certain things that need to happen in a Holby episode, like there needs to be a big scene in theatre with the surgery, because it's a surgical show. But it's a really good question, because it has to be formulaic to a degree, but you've got to balance that with freshness.
It has to look like the same show. There's something that comes up from time to time with and they're brilliant people, and we couldn't do what we do without them. But I have heard directors say, this is a really fantastic episode of EastEnders because it doesn't look like EastEnders. That's a problem.
To the point so much that when we rebuilt Coronation Street and moved 4 years ago, and in the run-up to the move, so we didn't want to alienate viewers, because as a viewer, although you're watching, you'll know something's different, but you won't know what it was. We actually changed the background sound very slowly over about 6 months. So in post-production, the sound from the city centre where we were is up here, and the sound from the water, the quayside where we are now, was down here, and very gradually over months we did this. So when you actually tuned in when we had moved, you didn't even know there's any difference. If we hadn't have done that, your ears would have thought, something's different, I don't like this, and then all the usual, it'll never be the same again. Interestingly, when we did move, Twitter did have Corrie's ruined, it'll never be the same again, but the episodes we were playing out we have a 6-week lead time, so people were watching exactly the same as they've watched for the last 30 years, and when the episodes from our new site went out, nobody noticed a thing. Twitter, social media.
Well, I'll tell you something that is quite interesting is that on Emmerdale, which is one of my shows, this year we've tried to change how we tell some of our stories, and so thinking back over the past 12 to 18 months, we did an episode through one of our characters, Ashley, who was suffering from dementia, which was purely from his point of view, told through the eyes of someone with dementia. So it was a very, very different way of telling story, and even to the point where Ashley was interacting with characters that we already know, but that looked and sounded differently. That episode was really highly praised because it sort of broke the mold a little bit of what people expect from a soap. And we've also done some episodes where we've taken time out of sequence, which again actually changes that narrative structure. But the point is when you watch the show, it should still feel like Emmerdale and still have the same tone, and that's what basically keeps the audience sort of involved. And it's interesting because I think Emmerdale can do that because of the nature of the show and its slot and where it is, and the fact that actually, Coronation Street, for example, the DNA of Coronation Street has been the same DNA since the show started back in 1968. If you watch the first episode and last night's episode, it's very much the same thing, whereas Emmerdale has been through a huge journey from being a sort of daytime soap about a family who live on a farm to this sort of village environment with all these sort of multiple characters. So I think you can do it, but it's about the tone and about the sort of feel of the show that keeps it being, what the show actually is.
And also I think by nature of sort of mirroring the world and telling stories of a changing world, that way you automatically come up with new stories. Ollie talked quite rightly about our shows never being entirely realistic, life with the boring bits taken out, but certainly from my point of view, Holby and Casualty have to hold a mirror up to British society and, you know, for people to recognize, especially in the guest stories on Holby and Casualty, where you have different guests every week, for people to go, oh gosh, yes, that's happening to me. You know, whether it's somebody who is maybe suffering abuse or somebody who's suffering a particular medical condition. I mean, one thing that I was very proud of last year in the sense of it's not good that it's happening, but Holby and Casualty's helplines after the shows that we put up, if there's a particular issue being covered in the shows, got a record amount of hits last year. Especially on Holby, we did a very long-running and quite painful to watch domestic abuse story with our very popular character Dom. So I think so long as, you know, you are telling stories that people recognise and that they can find, they can see that mirror, but also that they can find hope in them ultimately. They see our characters overcoming these problems and dealing with them. I think that's a great strength of ours and how we stay fresh and relevant as well.
Well, we'd like to say thank you very much indeed, and in particular, if you've been watching while it's being streamed, we hope it's been an interesting observation, and of course the questions have been fantastic from our audience today. I'd just like to finally say a big thank you to AJ, of course to Jenny, not forgetting Matt and Ollie and Simon. Can we give them a round of applause, please?